One of the things I'd love to talk with you guys about is the support resource metrics. It's something that I've developed over the past few years, and it comes from conversations I was having with colleagues. So I have a friend who has several autism schools throughout the country, and I have another one who has several autism support programs throughout the country. And we were kind of talking about, kids coming in and what kind of support they needed and the resources we have and making sure that we got the right fit, and also wanted to see their general growth. And it's interesting in this world, if you think about it, we used to have a lot of general doctors that kind of served everybody, the family practitioner, but now we've got a lot of specialists, and there's a beauty to that. But there's a bit of a struggle in the fact that sometimes the specialists don't know enough about other specialties, and there's sometimes things that interact or intervene with each other. And so sometimes the specialist can be hard. At a hospital, you can get multiple specialists together, and that's nice. And the reason I'm bringing this up is this idea of sometimes we get in, as a world, not just in the medical field, we get really focused on details and specific goals and forget to look at overall generalized measures. When I was in grad school, I was taught how to use the Halster-Rattan, which we don't need to get into, but it was a global way of looking at testing about a person to understand, them as a whole and how different parts may interact with each other. And as I started thinking about this and pondering this, I initially was trying to come up with ways of rating intelligence, rating autism. But when I really thought about it, I said, it doesn't really matter what the diagnosis is. What matters is what level of support they need, regardless of a diagnosis, an IQ, or anything else. And do we have the resources that can support that? And so as I started thinking about that, we started I started formulating ideas and ways of measuring that. And the initial ones that I kind of started thinking of was, well, we need to know how well they're doing generally within the milieu. Milieu is a word for, the community, within the community. And so one area I was looking at was their life skills. How well are they taking care of themselves? How well are they asking for help when they need it? How well are they managing their day and showing levels of independence? Another one was learning. And this isn't just academic, it's when we're able to teach them things, they're able to learn and use that and go forward with it. And then the next one was, I noticed, trying to keep kids in the flow of the day was really important. And the harder it was to keep them in the flow of the day, the more engagement that was required, the more resource depleting that was. So if you constantly need to be right next to a child, telling them, redirecting them, helping them stay engaged so they're learning and staying involved in different activities, well, that's a lot of support needed and a lot of resources required. And so I made an area for engagement. And then another area that's kind of a general milieu or general community issue that you see a lot is how good is their interactions with peers or their interactions with staff. And so the four main milieu measures are life skills, learning, engagement, and interaction. And if we can kind of see how good someone is doing at those four categories, then we kind of get an overall understanding of how well they're functioning in the day. And remember, they may struggle in some of these areas because of ADHD, because of autism. Some of them may have oppositional issues. Some of them may be experiencing bipolar disorder. Regardless of the labels that have been placed on them, regardless of anything else, it's just looking purely at what support do they need and can we match resources to support them. And hopefully not only does that make sure that we're getting the right kids in the program, but hopefully we can see that improving. So as a kid is able to better take care of themselves, better engage in learning, understand how to stay engaged in the flow of the day, as they're better able to have positive reciprocal interactions, then the amount of support they need starts going down and a lot of resources required goes down. And so starting to formulate this idea of what would this look like and how could we measure this? And so created a scale that goes from 1 to 7. And I made the scale fairly extreme on both ends. 1 being a kid who needs no support, no resources, could fit into any typical school setting with 30 kids in a class and function adequately okay with little to no help. And then on the extreme end with a 7, intensive hospital-like support, a lot of safety measures involved, the kind of, show someone that needs intense supportive help. And so this kind of started formulating this support resource metric. I realized there was a couple other areas that were important, but I wanted to make sure they were kind of separate or additional areas. The next 2 that I added, and again, they're both kind of unique variables, is safety and medical. So safety, again, it can be suicidality, it can be aggression, it can be dangerous behaviors, impulsive behaviors, whatever it is that really focuses people in, whether it's family, schools, staff members, whatever it is. If they've got behaviors that require a lot of vigilance due to safety precautions, well, that's a big issue, and it needs a lot of support because, whether it's harm to oneself, harm to others, or even more importantly, life, then we really got to take really good caution to watch for those. But not every kid has safety issues, and so I want it to be a unique variable that's separated from the other 4. And then, of course, medical. Some kids have a lot of medical needs. Some people have a lot of medical needs. And knowing the amount of medical needs can also help us to know if they're in the right placement and if we're doing the things we need to help them maybe work on their own healthy dependence. And so those are the main 6 areas that are evaluated in the support metrics. And with that, we can look at each one individually, but one thing that's kind of important for me is taking the 4 milieu measures and getting an aggregate score. Now, the scores can go from 1 to 7, but you can also have half points. So you can't go lower than 1, you can't go higher than 7, but between those 2 numbers, you can give half points. So in other words, you could say someone is getting a 3 or someone's getting a 3.5. The part of the reason for that is for more refined measures, but some of it's also psychological. When people know that they can make a decision, when they're caught between 2 options and they can take a half point, it makes it easier for them to go through and provide a score. So there's a method to the madness, shall we say. Let me give you kind of a rough idea, though, of what 1 looks like. So 1, like I said, is mostly independent. Daily ratios of 1 to 16 or greater. Like I said, they could fit into a normal school classroom with, up to 30 kids and be able to be quite fine. A 7 is intensive 1-to-1 support required, including additional interventions. To give you an idea of what a middle point would be, a score of 4, which is in the middle, structured support, sometimes intensive, daily ratio of 1 to 4, with some 1-to-1 support. So they definitely, at a score of 4, you're definitely finding a kid that needs smaller groupings, smaller settings to be able to be functional, and including periodically some 1-to-1 help. And that might be for 20 minutes, that might be for 5 minutes, that might be for an hour. But they periodically are needing some 1-to-1 support, and they need kind of smaller groupings to be successful. And so this helps us to understand how much intervention is required and how we kind of help these kids through that. And I created a rubric, and even within the specific areas, I gave more clear definitions for issues like when it comes to safety or when it comes to engagement. I gave some more kind of specific delineations of what that kind of looks like and what that means. And by doing that, we've kind of created a process of seeing what our kids are doing and seeing how we can help them. One thing that became important to me was also being able to understand and see the change. And since there's half points allowed, I wanted to be able to show that delineation. So when we aggregate the 4 milieu measures, the 4 community measures, which again is life skills, learning, engagement, and interaction, when we aggregate those 4 scores, I wanted to be able to not just have an additive number, I wanted to have it, doubled to account for the half point scores, which also allows you to see a bigger change. But then one of the things we realized is that some of these needed more weighting. So when you think about resources, you have to think about all kinds of resources: physical resources, time resources, emotional resources, and any kind of resource that it takes. And what we noticed in our own work, and I found this true as I talked with other colleagues, is that interaction and engagement definitely sucked a lot more resources, whether it's physical or emotional or otherwise, where life skills and learning weren't quite as resource depleted, especially emotionally. And if you have a lot of burnout with staff, that's not a good thing. Or you as a parent, if there's a lot of burnout for you as a parent, that's not a good thing. So what it created is an extended, which is multiplying by 2 to allow for the half points, and a weighted score. And so I used some mathematics statistics to fine tune that and find a score that would work. So with these extended weighted scores, I was then able to do just some slight adjustments and get 6 clean levels. And what these 6 clean levels are is 1 to 10 is a level 1, and 10 to 20 is then level 2, and so on until you get to 60 to 70, which is level 6. And then what we can then do is talk about what a child needs to do to continue to need less and less support and less resources. Because our goal is to get these kids back into a typical school setting, back into a typical life setting, for our adults, and for them to be able to work well with their families and friends. And whether that's moving back home or whether that's, for our young adults moving into an apartment nearby their families, we wanted to make sure that we were helping these kids to not need that constant additional support, and want to have a way of measuring that to make sure that it's good. So when we get down to level 1 to 2, that's kind of our green zone, and it's different for different kids. So for some, they can get down to level 1, some depending upon the makeup of who they are and their own limitations and areas of growth. Level 2 might be a great area. And then level 3, which is going to be our kind of yellow zone. And then we kind of go up into 2 orange zones, and then level 6 is a red zone. So red means they're probably not appropriate for at least our setting. So by looking at these aggregate extended weighted measures, we can have really simple scores that fall into a 10-point category. And that way, anyone can kind of read it, understand it, and see it. And then we can also help, the students themselves to be able to understand what they're working on, as well as parents to understand, hey, here's some of the specific things we're working on. There's so many other ways that we can measure, evaluate, and support students, and that would probably be for another video. But the support resource metrics is an essential way to understand how we're helping a kid to be more independent, to be more capable, to feel more autonomous, and to be able to actually measure that and show that. Another important thing that we do is we have treatment team monthly, and we'll be rating our students monthly on the support resource metrics. And after that, we'll have this aggregate treatment team score, and then our therapist will go and ask the student to rate themselves on these same 6 areas. And the key ones is definitely the first 4 milieu ones. And then we'll show them, after they've rated themselves, the score that the treatment team came up with. And this is actually also really helpful for our young people, because then we can start helping them to see their own areas that they are missing They'll also helping them understand their perception and start to create greater alignment. Because the more they understand themselves, the more they understand how other people are seeing them, and the more they're understanding how they're interacting in the world, the better they can help themselves. And so by once a month, showing a kid a treatment team score compared to their own score, it helps them to know what they're working on. It also helps them to perceptually get more in alignment with the experience that people have that are around them.